and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined in the Queen's Park Cafe in the south side of Glasgow with the writer Peter Mohan to talk all about his book Cheers, Govanhill. Hello Peter.
Hello Alistair, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and thanks for choosing this place. It seems like the perfect place to record this because it features in the book quite a bit.
It does. It's one of the old school pubs, one of the few left in Glasgow, and Govanhill in particular.
So tell us about Cheers, Govanhill, where it started and how it developed into this book.
Well, it started about 5-6 years ago with a blog called Cheers, Govanhill, and I just had the idea. I thought, why not write? I've been writing for many years, and I thought, I wonder if I could do something here. And I had the idea, and about 2 weeks later, I had started. And I set myself quite a tight deadline, which was really good. I thought I'd do 2 posts a week for about a year and see how that goes. And it went quite well. And it started off as thoughts about Govanhill, about living alone, about living in a tenement, living in a city, and it became more, strangely, it became more about Govanhill as it went on. So it was more about a sort of description, a sort of feeling about living in Govanhill, because Govanhill was changing before my eyes, you know.
So when would it have started? When did the blog start?
About 2019.
Right, okay.
Beginning of 2019. And I thought to myself, well, if I do about 300 words with a photo for each post, and I'll see how far I go. Because I had quite a lot of notes. I've been writing for years, keeping diaries and stuff. But it was all quite general. Mm-hmm. It wasn't specifically about Govanhill. It was mostly about a sort of urban environment and someone sitting watching telly thinking about Samuel Beckett or whatever it might be, or the Fall, you know. And then once I got quite a good reaction to it. As the months, it was a lot of work, and as I built up an audience, it became more about living in Govanhill rather than just living in a city.
So was this something that you think, I want to write something, and then you start and your original idea, and then it changes into, you find what it's about? Because
Yes.
I think that's one of the good things. Certainly was that the case with Scots Whay Hae when it was just a blog. I knew I wanted to write something, wasn't sure really what, and then it develops and you kind of find your voice.
That's exactly what happened, and I think I found an audience as well. You know, I want to overplay it, but I was I found that people quite could relate to what I was talking about, you know. What I found as well, curiously, I'd never really used social media before, and the blog was on WordPress, so I had to do quite a lot of research about other blogs, about how blogs work, about how to build an audience on Facebook. I had about 15 followers, 15 friends. So what really struck me quickly is, there's a lot of drivel out there. Oh gosh. But I followed quite a lot of blogs to see, and it settled down into about 8 or 10 or 12.
Right.
Half of whom were in America. Just happened to be Philadelphia, one was Chicago. And it seemed to hit. They might not know about the Queen's Park Cafe or about Victoria Road, about Govanhill against Pollock Shaws, but that they seemed to react, they seemed to hit home in some kind of way. And that was really reassuring, that while it's specifically about a place, the more it's about a place, the more it can talk to people who don't know anything about that place in a curious way, you know. So you find your feet that way, you know.
I wonder if you get the specifics right, then it almost reads as true. I find that if I'm reading a book that's set in anywhere else that I don't know, let's just say Sydney for saying that, but you can tell I think when you're reading that this has got the ring of truth about it.
Yeah, and that's what you're hoping for, and you hope that people react to that, people respond to that.
And what was the response then? What did people respond online saying we're really enjoying your blog? Did people get to know you? Did they know you were doing it?
There's a wee bit of hostility, I've got to say.
Right.
Govanhill has always been an easy target, and people warned me about this before. Again, not frequenting social media much. I wasn't really aware of that. I was right in the centre of Govanhill and the changes that was happening and the problems it had. Let's not pretend that Govanhill was great. Govanhill was a really difficult place 10 years ago in particular. So there was a lot of hostility, a lot of abuse. No, that's not true. I didn't get very much abuse. I got the occasional people, really rude,
right,
sort of quite right wing sort of stuff.
Okay.
And I just blocked them. I just ignored. Not as bad as a lot of people would have got, I think, if
right.
they were. And also people who were maybe more well-meaning, maybe slightly misunderstood some of the humour.
Right.
I was kind of taking the mickey out of Govanhill, but also taking the mickey out myself, out of everybody. And some of the humour might be quite hard to sort of digest. It's quite surrealist,
right.
I think, and it's quite satirical and sort of.
It is. I think you'd have to have a poor sense of humour not to get the humour from it. I have to say, if you thought this has been done seriously, because we should say it's fiction. Based on the fact, is that?
Yeah, I've called it semi-fiction. I think that's just a made-up term, obviously. So it is about Govanhill. It's definitely about Govanhill. But what I don't do, what I've never done, it's not about current events in Govanhill. So there might be shops or pubs that open and then close, or I'll refer to changes that way, where pubs that have been dead for years are taken over and are become thriving again with a brand new audience, and that's a really positive thing.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be too negative here at all about Govanhill. Glasgow and Govanhill is always changing, and that's one of the things I love about Glasgow. And Govanhill was kind of on the front line of that.
Because it does seem to me that it's a pull between kind of fearing change and accepting change. There's that kind of dynamic. I'm saying the character in the book, I'm going to say character, a narrator in the book. Yeah. There's a kind of push against, but also a welcoming as well. And
very much so.
Pulled that way.
Very much so, and I think that's one of the lovely things about writing fiction. Right?
Yeah.
I said this to someone that I used to be a journalist, and if you're a journalist, you have to be fair, balanced and accurate.
Yeah.
But if you're writing semi-fiction, you can write what you want. However, as we said, if there's no truth there somewhere, people aren't going to respond to it.
Yeah.
So it might not be events that happen in Govanhill, but it's the nature of events that are always happening. So resistant to the change when somebody is seeing their community change round about them, but welcoming in that change. That's the thing. I hope people pick that up, that he's not just a grumpy old guy sitting in his tenement complaining, Now he is, but at the same time, change is good. That's the great thing about Govanhill, is this constant.
There's lines like Govanhill is like south of France, I think. There's lots of comparisons with other areas. Now, the tongue is definitely in the cheek.
Yes,
you're doing it, but
much.
It's that kind of looking for the kind of the pause. It took me back, actually. I lived in High Street in Glasgow for years,
right,
and for about 25 years. And when I moved in, the day I moved in, a guy came up the High Street and looked at me and he went, "Are you one of the yuppies?" And I went, I don't think I am, but maybe I am. Moving into this area it wasn't even Merchant City back then. It was still kind of High Street.
Well, I've been to Cambuslang. I know what folk are like there.
Well, exactly. You don't get many, but that was when I thought, the change of different people moving in, it's going to get noticed by the folk who that they walk these streets all the time.
Well, that's it, and I think Govanhill was a really difficult place about 12, 15 years ago. It just was. There was the house prices collapsed. People wouldn't even use, estate agents wouldn't even use the word Govanhill. It would set off alarm bells everywhere. The Sunday Herald would be every other weekend there'd be a story, not much basis in truth, about sex trafficking. It was crime. There were a lot of Roma people moved in. It was very difficult, overcrowding. It was a really difficult time, but a lot of work was done in the background by the traditional the people like to target, as in the local council, the local housing associations, the police, the community council, people on the ground. This is unspectacular. work that gets done in the background day to day, and very slowly things changed. So you were used to living in an area that other people didn't really live in, people didn't come to.
Aye.
And then you began to notice sort of changes. So those changes were quite noticeable, quite remarkable, and that's where the blog sort of came from.
So what's your history with the area?
I've lived here about 25 years or so. I grew up in Govanhill, lived in France occasionally, here and there, lived in the West End for several years, then lived in Shawlands, then bought a flat in Govanhill, 2002, 2003 or something, and moved into my flat where I am now. And then overnight the prices collapsed and I must have lost 40 grand in the price of my flat, you know. But it's all paper money anyway, isn't it, you know.
Yeah.
So this new area which I saw, and then just things went downhill, and the close I was in, it was difficult. Now life is difficult, but what I think happens now sometimes is that people either don't know or try and pretend that didn't happen.
Right.
You know, we're never going to get anywhere if we don't recognise what happened in the past and the difficulties and that we're coming through. Now we have come through that, and people will use that. We see it now with Tories, immigration. We can see how easy it is for people to fall into that anti-immigrant trap. Now I never did, and the blog doesn't. It absolutely does not. But some people who would criticise the blog or criticise Govanhill from that point of view, you know. But pretending that there weren't issues gets us nowhere, I think, you know.
And I mean, the history of the area more generally, I can remember having a chat with Andy, who ran the country shop butchers on High Street, but they used to have one, the first
Allison
one was on
Street.
Allison Street, and he was telling me about the area because his dad had started the shop there and how it had always been an area for immigrants to come in. Often that was the place they were put first. You would go back to the Irish, and that was the case. And so it's got that history there of almost permanent change, if you can have such a thing.
Absolutely, totally. Irish, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Jewish before the Second World War as well. So it's always been that place. I think Simon Murphy,
who does the forward in the book.
Yes, the photographer, he described it as an Ellis Island, Govanhill, so the kind of gateway to Glasgow and the gateway to the rest of the country. So people come here. That's why there's a lot of flats to rent. That's why it's almost set up for that, you know.
Yeah.
And then they either stay or they move on. So that history of Govanhill, history of immigration, history of nationalities and religions and races and languages all mingling together. Now that's a city thing. That's a big city thing. London, Paris, New York, and this is a Glasgow flavour of that, if you're on a smaller scale obviously than New York. But that's what immigrants, that's the immigrant story. That's the tenement story, that's the tenement life. And what I try and do in some parts of the book is highlight to people that Glasgow is always like that. Glasgow is a really cosmopolitan place. When I grew up in Govan, we had neighbours from Poland, we had neighbours from Ireland, from the Highlands, from all over. It's not a new thing, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think back to the register list when I was at school, and you had names from exactly that kind of thing, places all over.
There you go.
And I mean, we should say actually, although it's Cheers Govanhill, it's about Glasgow more widely.
Yes.
I mean, there's lots of references to places, some of them, you know, less celebrated than others, you know, that have probably never been written about in a book before,
okay.
I reckon.
Well, I think what I try and do, Ali, I think it's fair to say, is to reclaim Govanhill as part of Glasgow. Because the past 10 years or so, it is unique. It is unique and it's not unique.
Yes.
From my point of view, again, what makes Govanhill so interesting is what makes Glasgow interesting. The mix of nationalities, the way that people just get on with things, the edge, the working class edge, the roughness, the directness, the qualities that people love about Glasgow, Govanhill has. So it's not all, with respect, it's not all sourdough bread and so on and £6 cups of coffee, you know. It's the bampots, it's the folk we knew when we grew up, and they're still here, and that's what I love. I love the new things as well. But it's about Glasgow as much as Govanhill almost, because Govanhill is not identical to Canvas Lang or Govan or Pollock Shaw's, but it's got the same sort of heritage. It looks the same. People are the same. They might be slightly different in Govanhill, but it's part of a bigger entity.
And that brings me to the kind of style of the book, because often, you know, you're listing names. There's one, I think, where you kind of listing the hills. You know, I can't remember Fernhill, but Parkhill, and you know, you've got all these different things, and you often do that, and it seems to me there's almost a kind of stream of consciousness aspect to it. Is that fair?
Yes, I think so. That's just a sort of style that I've kind of adopted. It seems to work for me, you know, and I think you've got to learn from the masters, really, haven't you, if you can.
Well, I when I was reading it, it was like Kelman meets Kerouac.
Oh,
that's the two.
I'm
and I meant that.
So pleased. That's the nicest thing anybody's ever said.
I genuinely mean that. You know, I was thinking about the first time, you know, reading the Kerouac books, where it's just this, you know, stream of words going down the page, you know, as he typed it. Yep. And I wondered if that's almost how you were doing it.
No, there's quite a lot of editing goes into this. I've got to say, a lot of work. But Kerouac, On the Road, that changed my life.
Yes.
Now, I read it again later, many years later, and I had to chuck it after about 20 pages. Right.
Yeah.
Now, at its time, when I was 18,
which is when I was roughly
it's
about
the
that.
most important book for an 18-year-old out there. So that definitely influenced my style. That made me interested in writing. But James Kelman, excuse me, is just a master craftsman, I think, in writing. And what he's brilliant at is we call it stream of consciousness, but kind of human consciousness. So somebody sitting in a pub or whatever's happening, their consciousness, they'll be away, and then they'll bring it right back to sitting with half a pint of heavy or something in the pub. Absolutely. So that's what I was trying to imitate, if you like. Yeah. So the way that somebody can go away on a sort of stream of consciousness and thinking about something or talking about something, and then bringing it right back to... Now, I'm nowhere near, of course, I would never compare myself to Kelman, but that attempt to describe what's happening when somebody's kind of talking is you might as well aim for the top, and then you get nowhere near it, but at least you've tried. You know?
And in a lot of his short stories, you know, he'll actually come in almost mid-conversation or mid-thought, and then leave the same way.
That's
it's
right.
An incredible bit
and so there'll be no full stop at the end of a paragraph, and it'll just stop. And then it'll start with a line of dialogue or something. Or what I remember some of his earlier stuff, they'll have 3 dots with the silence. If somebody's two people are talking, somebody says something, and then he's trying to explain what silence is with 3 dots in the next line. So, as I say, please, I'm not for a second comparing myself to the guy.
But it was certainly his short stories that, as I was reading, because there are chapters, but they often, you know, you've got events and people that you return to that are, you know, that are things that have happened. Some of them may be fictional, some of them may be fact. There may be a mixture of both, I'm not sure, but you know, you've got that kind of almost poetic repetition at times, you know, to get these things across. But I guess if you're writing it as a blog, that kind of makes more sense, because you maybe, if it's episodic like that, you're maybe returning to these things.
Yes, and I think the format of the book is quite, because it is blog posts stitched together pretty much, and I think that helps to break it up. So every 300-400 words, so there's no massive slabs of text that's really difficult to get through. It might be difficult to get through, but it's in chunks, hopefully easily digestible chunks, because of the way it was written. And that means that the idea of the blog really worked for me, because there's nothing like a deadline, a self-imposed deadline. I would post it on a Wednesday, on a Saturday, and I just had to, and I did it, you know, for...
I guess with your journalistic background, you probably get a bit used to that.
You just know that you could sit and tweak this for the next 5 days, or you could just get it done and move on to the next one.
That's right.
You know, and it's a real discipline, and it really helps you. You know, we could all sit and wonder about what might happen, but if you've got a deadline of what you might do, you just need to get it done.
Yeah.
So so the blog posts of 300-400 words meant I could try and bring a bit of variety into that 300-400 words, so that every post is not the same. It's not from the same perspective. It's a different style, it's different language, it's different sort of tricks of the trade that are used. But you know, I also like playing with words, sort of word games. Whether that works or not is a different matter, but slight repetitions that might work in a sort of humorous stream of consciousness type way.
I mean, you can read it in the chunks that you suggest, but it's also a bit of a page turner because you want to get what's coming next on that. I went kind of method. I thought I'm going to read this. I went to the Rose Riley pub in Govanhill, so and I read most of it over a few pints, kind of doing it that way.
Great.
Which I thought was a good way of doing it, but I also thought this. I'm not kind of going, I'll look at my phone or I'll do, the things that are there to distract us these days. You really can get into this.
That's really nice of you to say that. Much appreciated.
So it's interesting that it's from the blog, as you said, stitched together. But I don't think it necessarily reads like that.
Oh, great, appreciate it. I mean, there's a wee bit of thought. I thought about how to sort of structure it, because I'll be honest with you, there's not a great deal of character development here, Now, from beginning to end, there is, I think, during it.
Yes, there is.
And what develops or what changes is I mean, Govanhill's the main character in the book, as is Glasgow. Obviously, the narrator is as well. So that the change, it comes and goes, things happen, and I thought I'd try and start off quite positively. And I was quite fortunate / unfortunate that the pandemic happened sort of halfway through my blog, if you like. So that was a convenient midway point where things are positive and then things kind of go downhill and then they come back up. But he kind of ends up sort of at the same place where he started, because it's about the character of the area, and it's a character driven story rather than plot driven, I think. Now if the narrator was to sell up and move to Shawlands, then that's a whole different story. Maybe that character development's a different one.
But that's interesting as well, the character's relationship with other parts of Glasgow, and particularly ones which are kind of cheap majowl to Govanhill. So, you've been at my flat, I'm in the edges of Strathbungo at the very least, and you can think, what's the deal with Strathbungo?
I'm surprised you've got me on your blog. I thought you might be chasing me out, with a knife.
I get it completely, and there's lots of things like that which are carried through, which that's where a lot of the humour lies, the way you think about maybe the relationship with Shawlands, the relationship with Queen's Park itself, and all of those things.
I mean, when I moved, I lived in Shawlands for a rented flat for a couple of years, and it always struck me that the relationship between Govanhill and Shawlands, that's a very Glasgow reference, was a bit like between Partick and the West End. So Partick and Govanhill were very similar but slightly rougher, a wee bit cheaper. Who could afford to buy a flat in Shawlands or buy a flat in Byers Road? Just slightly more Glaswegian, slightly more rough and ready, and that's one of the reasons. And it was affordability as well.
Yeah.
But another interesting thing, practical thing, was when I mentioned the lockdown pandemic, and I really started walking.
Yeah.
And I still walk.
Yeah.
Thousands of steps a day. I go up first thing in the morning. I go for quite a long walk, 40-minute walk. So the fact is that I literally saw my area, my community more often. I walked the streets more than I did.
It's a great way to find out about your city.
And also, I mean, I've read this and I found this to be true. Whatever you're writing, what a brilliant way of clearing your head. Not just clearing your head, but getting the thoughts going, that you might have some particular issue or think, I can't quite work out where I'm going to go with this paragraph here. So you put it away, you go for a walk, and subconsciously something happens. Something about the movement, about the vision and so on, and you come back and you've resolved that situation in your own head. But practically and physically, I physically saw much more of Govanhill and surrounding areas during these walks than I ever had.
And the rest of the city? Did you kind of go out to the...
Not so much. Right. Wee bit. I'm beginning to go, but I love the south side so much. And I don't drive, so I always walk.
It's such an interesting city in this way, because we're divided by river, as you know, and I lived in High Street, as I say, for many years, and I went to university eventually in Glasgow, so I'm in the West End, and so that was my kind of journeys in the city. It would be, and sometimes walk, but it would be from kind of High Street, sometimes at the East End, but mostly out to the West End, and I would very rarely come south. I can remember about, let's say it's 20 years ago, being asked to go to somewhere in the bungo, thinking it's miles away, and now I'll happily walk into town, but the perceptions, and now I'm in the south side, hardly ever go into town. I hardly ever go.
Do you know,
it's such an interesting city that way because it's so divided.
it's
by
always
that
been like that way. I mean, I'm a Celtic fan, as any reader will know, and until recently I didn't know anything about the East End, apart from the journey from the city centre to Celtic Park. So the north of the city, now I know a wee bit better. My brother lives there, my other brother lives in the Gorbals, but yeah, it's a curiously divided sort of city, whether it's the river that divides it or what. But now
but even East End, West End, I mean, you've got such
the north,
a difference. Yeah.
I mean, people talk about Glasgow, more so London, a collection of villages, and I think Glasgow is as well. I think in London the references that are the implications that are very separate sort of villages. I don't know whether that's the case in Glasgow, but that's one of the things that, as we were saying earlier, about reclaiming Govanhill as part of Glasgow. The thoroughfares, the libraries, the town hall, the borough halls, the swimming baths.
Yeah, they've all got those.
You know, Denniston, Springburn, Partick, Govanhill, Pollock Shields, Pollock Shaws. So each, now I'm sure there'll be patterns there with immigration, with work, with factories and mines.
And parks as well.
And parks, exactly that, yeah. And Queen's Park is, well, I'm afraid I've got a new favourite, and that's Pollock Estate, past a year. But Queen's Park is the diversity of Queen's Park. I love Queen's Park, just for such a small area, and you've got a pond, you've got botanic gardens, you've got tennis courts, you've got football pitches, you've got pitch and putt, you've got allotments, you've got. So Glasgow's parks are one of its hidden jewels, I think. You know,
it's an interesting city. It's kind of always been written about. Go back to Kelman, and then you also mentioned Tom Leonard and Alistair Gray and people who did write about the city. It seems to me recently there's been a lot. You know, people are really engaging with the city in all sorts of different ways. You know, just last year there was a novel called Glasgow Boys by Margaret MacDonald. Ryan O'Connor's The Voids was kind of set. I mean, there's too many to mention, but also in song, there's a lot of people singing and writing about the city as well.
Well, I think I read or saw your stuff about the Tenementals quite recently. Yeah.
Well, I was listening to that album just after I'd finished reading Cheers Govanhill. I mean, because particularly the song Owl of Minerva mentions Cranhill and all these different areas, and it goes north, south, east, and west around the city. You know, that's the basis of the song. I thought there's some real symmetry going on here.
It's funny, a friend of mine had sent me a link to that, you know, and said, did you write this? that sounds so preposterously pretentious
No,
there,
but because the themes are the same. They're kind of showing Glasgow as a whole, and not saying that embracing stereotypes, but also bringing other aspects as well that are less talked about.
Yeah, and I think that's your point about change is an important one, that you want that we celebrate what makes Glasgow great, but one of the greatest things about Glasgow is the willingness and ability to embrace change. So the fact that it changes is one of the best things about it. My brother is an architect, and he talks about Edinburgh as a museum. It just never changes. Now he's got a bit of a scorched earth policy, Paul, when it comes to the art school. I just can leave it alone, you know. It's burnt down, you know. But that dynamism.
Is he saying flatten the castle?
No, but he's saying sort of, you know, because if you don't demolish buildings, what else can grow in its place? I suppose.
Architects would be
you know. But that change, the change that we both saw when we were growing up, how the city was changing in front of us, and is always willing to change. You know.
I spoke to a journalist, Alan Taylor, who wrote a book about Edinburgh, the autobiography.
A lot of time for a big supporter of James Kelman as well, which is
absolutely
very unusual.
Well, Scottish Review of Books as
on
well.
that level, very, very unusual. So a lot of time for Alan Taylor.
Alan was saying that a lot of people see the difference between Edinburgh and Glasgow is that the middle classes in Edinburgh will not allow change. They will fight tooth and nail. When there was talks about putting roads through the middle of the park, what you know what I mean, up the top end. Can't think what they're called. Near the university, you've got the big parkland. There was talking about putting roads through there. There was talk about moving the modern gallery to Glasgow, and there's such fights against these.
Really?
Whereas in Glasgow it seemed to be, you want a motorway through the middle of your city? Well, you know, on you go. Oh, well, you're pulling down that. Well, on you go, you know. And I think that's very interesting.
I think that you touched a real interesting point there, Ali, and I've seen this in other cities like Berlin. I noticed was the same, and I saw this. You'll see it in Cambuslang. I saw it in Govan. There'll be streets that you wouldn't walk down, beside streets that were like the American Midwest, suburban, green, and you've got, you know, really grim, difficult, horrible tenements just right beside them. So it's these people, these communities live cheek by jowl with each other, and that's the great thing. So if you're a middle class person in the sort of south side, you know exactly what Govanhill's like, because it's right on your doorstep. You're not separated physically by it, you know. So that adds to the melting pot.
A pal of mine, he was a teacher. His first job was in Drumchapel, and then he got a job in Bearsden, and it was literally, you know, about a 5-minute, 10-minute walk. He says, but it could have been, you know, on Mars compared to once we compared.
And I think, I don't know if it's still the case, the difference in life expectancy.
Was in such a short area.
10 years or something, I think. You know. So the willingness to kind of cheek by jowl, this sort of jumble in the best sense of Glasgow, of tenements, of apartment blocks, is what's always been most interesting.
And we've talked a little bit about influences, but are there other influences on your writing that we've not mentioned?
Well, I've got quite wide-ranging taste, and I mean, I love P.G. Wodehouse, for example, right? Now, he's the absolute master, so I couldn't... Cormac McCarthy is a brilliant writer as well. Elmore Leonard, you mentioned Tom Leonard, he's great, but Elmore Leonard. So you try and be, I mean, that guy's a master of dialogue. You know, so you try and pick up what you can from all sources, but also The Fall. That was a big. I mean, Marquis Smith is what a brilliant wordsmith he is, you know. And
there's another almost stream of consciousness at times with a lot of his stuff.
And really brilliant imagery, and just, you know, how you can use a couple of words and just to create an image that sticks in your head. Or Elmore Leonard can describe somebody's shoes, and you picture that whole character just with one line of description. So that trick of doing something slightly unexpected, avoiding cliches, and being quite blunt and direct where necessary as well is a really great things to learn from, you know.
And you never considered getting a fedora? You seem like a that's one person, isn't it, you're thinking of?
I don't think it. I'm not sure how long I would last. I mean, I'm really lucky. I've got quite a big family, brothers and sisters, and we're all quite close. And I've got a group of friends that we're friends with for 40 years. So, and the great thing is that, and this is a really positive thing, they just don't let you away with stuff.
So I should explain that. You say that aspiring writers, they seem to all want to get a fedora, but Gray, Kelman, Leonard, you know, they don't need that kind of fedora. They just write.
Well, do you know what I think? Oh gosh, I think I was reading The Guardian. That's what it was, and it was a really horrible. I can't remember, some new writer won a competition, and she was pictured wearing a fedora, and she thought it was like cosplay. I can't remember his name, but she was wearing this hat in order to consider herself a writer. And I thought, that's just preposterous. You've got that the wrong way round, do you know what I mean? So that particular thing was specifically about that thing. That you think that putting on a hat means that you've got something to say, you know.
And is the blog still going? Are you still?
No. I'll be honest with you. I've kind of run out of things to say in a way. It's quite hard to say the same thing 6 times in a slightly different way each time. I'm not still there, you know.
But what about writing?
Oh, I'm writing more than ever.
Right.
Yeah, I'm writing another book. That is my second book. First one was unpublished. And I'm writing another one, which is a collection of stories, broadly travel stories. And again, I'm trying. You've got to try things, haven't you?
Got to. Yeah.
I'm trying the first person, second person, and third person stories. I'm trying to be as interesting as I can, because you've got to interest yourself. And any prospect of what a reader might want I think, is pointless. Because if you do that, you're going to follow the market, you know, and it's going to be a few years with vampires or Harry Potter-esque or some kind of medieval Catholic conspiracy or something, you know. So I don't know what the current things might be. So if it makes you, if you're interested in it, or if it's a gap in the market, you often say that with people, musicians. I'm making the music that I want to hear, you know. And there's so much bad stuff out there that I would never underestimate anger as a motivation.
Well, that's interesting, because in the book you could see there is some anger there, or at least frustration, you know, kind of driving a lot of it. It's lightened by a lot of the comedy, but it's there.
It's dangerous as well, though, isn't it? Because the last thing I want to be some old guy who's complaining about change. Oh, nobody wants to hear that.
Yeah.
You know? Now there's elements of that, but leavened hopefully
But I think
by
that
a bit of
there's
humour.
self-aware elements.
A bit of self recognition as well.
Yeah.
So the anger of, man, how the hell could that guy get that published? If he can do it, so can I, and that's a really good motivator. So as far as the motivation goes, now that anger, and I found this a couple of times. What I found, a few times I was in a couple of places and I was quite annoyed, and I went home and I wrote about it instead of letting it percolate for a week or so, or a couple of weeks, and then you come at that thing and the anger isn't anger anymore.
Yeah.
You're able to look at it as sort of slightly humorously or something, you know. So the anger is dangerous. It's a good motivator, but you don't want to be angry writers, like angry people who shout, talking, exclamation, talk in capital letters. They're not that interesting.
No,
you know.
and you know, there's plenty of angry blogs out there. That you just, you know,
Certainly, angry white, middle-aged white men. You know, there's plenty of them around. You know, so.
And in terms of writing, do you feel your time in journalism? Because I'm always interested in different types of writing. Do you feel your time in journalism has helped, or at times it's a very different way?
It's absolutely, unquestionably helped me with the discipline. Firstly, with the getting something done. You've got an hour to get it done. Just get it done.
You know where an apostrophe goes?
Yes, and those. I will become an angry man if you start talking to me about that. But yeah, the ability to tell a story.
Yeah.
Now it's different. Obviously, I was mostly a sub-editor.
Right.
But I was a reporter. I was a news reporter. So totally different. But the craft of writing, the craft of simplicity and directness, and getting rid of extraneous or extra or pointless words or phrases, just really honing in, being an editor. I'm best, I think, as an editor, and the work is really heavily, not necessarily heavily edited, but it's gone through a lot of processes, because each blog was checked, and so I'm pretty confident there's no typos in the book, but I might be wrong. So yes, it's the use, it's the facility of words, because that's your what do you call it, your method, if you like. That's the means, you know. It's not paint, it's not clay. They're trying to paint these pictures in words. So,
and I think as well, what people sometimes don't realise is that often books or anything written, it's the edit when it comes together. I know plenty of writers that really have said to me, I do not like the initial thing of getting a story or whatever it might be on page. I find that really difficult, and you think, well, why do it? But once it gets into the edit, the story emerges, and that's where you think, this is what I was trying to do.
That's the greatest, the joy of that, you know, when you, because I write, I'm quite long, it's quite a long process the way I write, you know. I write in hard copy, I write in notebooks,
right,
with a pen, which I think is a really important way of getting thoughts down.
Yeah.
And when I get those thoughts down, I don't edit that process. You get them all down, and then you come to edit it. And a lot of it you just delete, rubbish.
Yeah.
That's good, that's interesting, let's keep on that. But that process of turning what you've got, of polishing it, of making it into something, not spending weeks and weeks polishing it, because that's where the deadline comes in. You think, well, I've polished that enough time to move on to the next bit. But that process of making that something that other people might want to read about or might want to hear is the greatest joy.
Yeah.
You know? So, but tell you what was real interesting writing the blog when I started was how much I learned about writing just by doing it. I mean, obviously as a journalist I knew I did a lot there, but So I responded not necessarily to, we talked about the market a minute ago, it's not that you're thinking, right, is this going to sell? Is this what people want to hear? No, people want to hear what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The few people that do, they don't want me to write what I think they want to hear, you know. But knowing things like, but if you think something's humorous and it lands with a thud, you think, okay, so you learn things that way, you know. Something that you think you just, that's not much to it, and people really respond to it, and you think, okay, so you do learn from, and having a readership. It's dead easy to sit in your living room with your notebook and just write for years and years. If you're going to risk putting yourself out there,
absolutely,
and you think you know about politics and you talk about politics, something my older brother said to me years ago, which I've always remembered, whatever you write about, there's going to be somebody who knows much more than you about whatever it is. So if you're putting yourself out there to talk about something, you better get used to people disagreeing with you, having a different point of view, having a go back at you, and knowing more about it. So that discipline, I suppose that's the discipline in the wider way.
That's the kind of with any writing, if you're putting it, making it public, that's the fear, isn't it? That the reception is not going to be, can be difficult. I think particularly when you're writing about, as we say, this is fiction, but it's a real area with real people and all of those things that you make in the book. Absolutely.
So it's quite easy to, not that I have ever done that, I think, but it'd be quite easy to be too critical. Now you can be critical in a general sense but I would never start criticising a particular cafe or a particular pub or a particular individual, even though I know quite a few stories, as many people do, about what's going on in Govanhill, but that's not what I'm interested in at all, you know.
Well, that's the thing, you know, when you do mention places such as where we're sitting now, it's, you know, as part of the community. You know, that's the thing.
It's not something that specifically happened in that place at that time, and you know.
There's lots of great references, you know. I remember the first time I walked down Butterbiggins Road and going, what the hell is this name of this? So there's lots of, because I same as you in lockdown in particular, kind of walk this area and nearby, just, you know, kind of every day really, and you discover lots of great little places.
And again, that's the story of Glasgow for me when I was a kid, you know, or not only a kid when I was growing up, but when I was grown up. Just the diversity. I always think Glasgow, I'm a real partisan, you know, and Glasgow is, in my imagination, it's always much bigger than it actually is in practical terms, you know, like 600,000-700,000 people. Now obviously that's a whole different story, but the wealthy suburbs like Bearsden and Newton Mearns are now no longer part of Glasgow and have taken their tax base with them. You know?
Well, that's
so really impoverished the city. But Glasgow as a corner basin is what, 1.5 million or so if you're talking Paisley and other places, you know. So endless. I think I used this line a few times. It was always the most interesting city in the world to me, which it's true. It just is, always is, you know. So if you're listening to this from overseas, do come and visit. Peter, I really enjoyed Cheers Govanhill. I didn't know what to expect because I didn't know the blog, and I just, you know, as I say, I really went through it quickly because it was such a good read. That's lovely of you to say that, Arthur. Much appreciated.
And thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you very much for talking to me. Great.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.